Welcome to FemLead, the podcast on female leadership and role models. This show aims to inspire and equip you with the tools you need to navigate your career plans. FemLead brings inspiring career perspectives and strategies to guide your path to success. Your host, Alexandra, will interview role models on new exciting topics with each episode. If you like what you hear, give us a review and subscribe to the show on your preferred streaming platform. Enjoy.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Family Podcast. We have a special guest today, Petra Wille, an independent product leadership coach and author who's been helping product teams boost their skill sets and up their game since 2013. There's a little bit of a backstory here because I had the pleasure of meeting Petra in person when she joined one of the Product Tank meetups here in Copenhagen last year, and I've been following her ever since. I think the way that she explains product management and the way that she talks about leadership and creating the teams within product management is really, really cool. So I think you will really benefit from hearing her thoughts on the industry, on the field, but also the way that she developed writing her book that I'm going to mention in a second, and how Petra is sharing those insights and those learnings within her presentation. She has been for the past 4 years working to helping product leaders build outcome-oriented product teams, and she is dedicated to sharing her knowledge with the broader product community. In January 21, she published Strong Product People, a complete guide to developing great product managers. The book has already generated a lot of buzz in the product community, with Martin Eriksson, the founder of Product Tank and co-founder of Mind the Product, calling it the book we all needed on how to coach and empower our teams. To help even more product leaders become good coaches, she developed the 52 questions coaching card set in 2016. And alongside her freelance work, Petra is also the co-organizer of Product at Heart, a conference in Hamburg, Germany. Today, Petra joins Family Podcast to discuss her professional development and share her advice for product leaders looking to excel at building products people love, and of course, how to build stronger teams. I really much look forward to sharing this interview with you. So without further ado, let's welcome Petra to Family Podcast. Hi, Petra. Welcome to Family Podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm fine. Looking forward to this conversation.
I'm super excited that we got to meet and speak about your cool career, also the professional path that you've chosen, the book. I've been very inspired since I've met you in Copenhagen at the Product Meetup, and I'm really happy that we got to schedule this call. Petra is very inspiring. You'll all see that she did a lot of research and has a lot of wisdom to share. But before we deep dive into product management and coaching, I would like to set the stage and tell for the listeners, what is now your current focus in your professional life? What is it that you are currently engaged in?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer. One would think so, but it's actually not. So the first thing I usually would say is I'm a solopreneur, so it's only me working on the things that I'm working on, at least to some extent. I'm focusing on helping organizations that are doing software development in figuring out what they want to work on, why they should work on these things, how to make their customers happy with the stuff that they build, right? And I do so by in the past coaching their product teams and product development teams, and the last 4 years I'm focusing on helping product leaders, so the people managing the product organization and managing the product leads, to up their game, mostly on topics like people development, so how to help product people to get better at what they do, how to build a product culture, these kind of things. And that's what I do most of the time. Then I do a lot of content creation and sharing content online around these topics, right? And just last autumn, founded a company which is called Cultivate Curiosity. And together with a colleague of mine, we co-founded this, and we are running the biggest German-speaking product conference in Hamburg this June. So yeah, a lot of things that are going on.
Fantastic. I think I mentioned some of these highlights in your bio, and I'm actually going to focus on your coaching career because I'm interested on the change you made from being in product leadership to coaching. What makes you interested in coaching?
Actually, was not a decision that I took. It was more, as so often in my career, it was more a coincidence that I ended up in this role of being a coach. And maybe let's unpack that for a second. So I started as a software engineer. Then the colleagues realized quickly that I'm the one that is good in talking to the users and the customers and the clients and bringing back requirements. So they pushed me in this direction of, hey, could you maybe do the specification and figure out what we need to build? And then we can sit here and just do the coding part. So there was not a deliberate decision to become this product management person. At some point, definitely, yes. I applied for a job called product manager, right? So that was a decision of mine. But so the first few weeks and months and products and projects was more that people pushed me into this direction. And it was a bit of a similar situation with the coaching some years later, after being in product for quite some time, in product leadership roles, in running product organizations, then running a small startup. And then I decided to become an interims head of product. So what I did for quite some time is help companies where the head of product, the person running the product organization was on parental leave. And in Germany, parental leave can be like a 12 to 14 month thing, right? So you don't want to leave a product organization without any leadership during such a long period of time. So I decided that might be something I might be interested in and enjoy. And I did that. And in these interims roles, sometimes the head of product came back from parental leave, but the people said, like, could Petra just come by every once in a while? Because we liked how she helped us to grow in our roles and to further our craft as product people. So she's really good in the people development bit. Can she just be a coach and come by every month or something like that? So again, other people decided that is something that I have a talent with. And then over the years, obviously, I realized that that's a talent of mine. I thought about if I want to do more of that, then definitely learned a lot about coaching, read tons of books and took courses and training and all these kind of things. But that's how I became a coach, so to say.
That sounds great. And I'm happy that you've mentioned a little bit more about your top skills and what did you bring to the team. Because my next question is about, what are the top three top skills that you believe product leaders should have? And if you may make a correlation, what do you think changed from what we would say 5 years ago? Especially since you've written a book and have talked about product leadership, mentored and coached so many people.
Yeah. We first briefly have to talk about terminology because in product words are so often confused. So let me first of all define what I'm talking about when I say product lead. So for me, a product lead is somebody leading the product organization and managing people that hold the titles of product manager or product owner, sometimes user researchers, sometimes interaction design or design people, right? So these are usually the people that are in a product organization and in a product team. And the product lead, in my terminology, is the person running this organization. They're often responsible for the whole product portfolio. So what are the products that we offer at the market? They are equally responsible for who are the people on this team. So the hiring, the onboarding, the people development, and to some extent responsible for how are we doing all of this. So how do we figure out what to build? We call this product discovery in our terminology. So a bit of the process that comes with product management is usually something a head of product or a product lead is looking into as well. And if that is the role that we're talking about and looking at, I think, I don't have a good word for that, but kind of adaptability is definitely a personality trait. Maybe it's not even a skill to have if you are in a product leadership role, because things are changing really quickly these days. So many new technologies coming up. So you really have to be adaptable in the role that you actually are. Then definitely a skill is providing people with actionable feedback, and that should be behavioral feedback or task-related feedback. Oftentimes, product leads don't struggle with the task-related feedback, so they can feedback on how a particular meeting went, but it is harder for them to feedback on behaviors that people actually showing or have developed. So that is definitely an skill. And then another skill, and maybe that's two things that I need to mention. One is really making time for themselves to think things through. So, and have ideas on how they could actually think things through. And once they gained clarity, because that's why we want to think things through, they hopefully can provide this directional clarity to the organization and say like, hey, look, this is our product strategy that we're currently having, and these are the goals that we're optimizing for, and that's how we measure if we're coming closer to the strategic ideal version of our product, right? So this being able to provide directional clarity and therefore making time to think through, definitely something that is important in leadership these days.
Super, super relevant. And related to your think things through approach or advice, I think I had a Eureka moment when I realized that I was in way too many meetings and I didn't have time to discuss, with myself, okay, what is it that we actually need to prioritize based on all the feedback that you've gotten? Because you always want to be also connected with the team enough so that you get all the information, the knowledge, you are aligned all the time, you want to be aligned all the time. But then when is it that you actually sit down and prioritize, okay, from everything we've learned, realistically based on our deadline and what we want to achieve, what should we prioritize? Because if we have all of the sprints and all of these artifacts we work with, but the more people you ask, the more, time it will take to align. And sometimes you need to sit down with yourself and be like, okay, this is the way I would propose it. And then let's take it further and see how can this work, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not everybody's leadership style, but it was. So I'm super similar to your leadership style, maybe, because it always was my leadership style as well, that I needed a lot of time for reflection and really like defining my personal preference, and then having the conversation with the team where I say like, hey, look, that is the idea of mine. That's how we could go about this thing. What do you think? And I always tell everybody that I really love if they push back on my ideas, but first of all, I have to have my own personal take on things. So yeah, I'm really similar to what you were describing.
Awesome. I really wanted to mention that because I think for me it was a learning by doing sort of setup, which I'm sure is similar for many product managers, right? It's not a very...
No, there are not so many of us trained and on universities and stuff like that,
exactly.
Right? Most of us still have learned it by doing,
And it was a very big moment, right? And then I think it really grew from there into something way more specific. Yeah. And on that note, because you wrote a book about product managers, right? How did you decide to start writing a book? And if, what should the listeners expect from it?
So to some extent, I knew that if I want to do what I want to do, being self-employed and working with coaching clients all over the world, that at some point in time I have to write a book, right? So that people have this kind of, Petra, that is actually the topic she's talking about most of the times. So that is exactly something that I realized early on. But then what topic to write about? And it took me years to find a topic that I was passionate enough about to really put in the time to think things through again, and putting something in between the two pages of the two covers of a book, right? And how I found the topic is there was a bit of a eureka moment as well, because after coaching the individual contributor product management folks for 7-ish years, I realized, okay, I know a ton about how to explain certain concepts in product management to IC level product people, but often their leads don't. So basic things like time management or prioritization, or how do we work with hypotheses in product management, I could explain it well. The product leads often couldn't, but I don't scale. So I cannot help the whole product leadership world. So I decided the book scales much better. And that's why I put a lot of the things, hey, this is how I coach product discovery, and that is how I explain time management for product people, or that's how I approach agile way of workings for product people. And that's how I decided to write the book. And the book is really focusing on the people development part of product leadership. So it's not talking about how to create a product strategy. It shines a light on how to coach product people if they want to write a product strategy. So it's super meta, but that is actually something that I consider to be helpful, and I haven't found that in the bookstores yet when I was starting to write the book. So that's another reason why I decided, okay, then it's me, then I go write it.
I love it. And I also think that you
Thank you.
pinpoint something that it's super relevant, and that is the talent part of product management, because it is not necessarily a well-known university subject. There is no bachelor, to my knowledge, that maybe now it is more than it
a
did
few.
a few years ago. But I learned about product by working in SaaS, in software companies. I didn't learn about it first by going to school when I started university, right? So I think that there's something there really, really cool about discussing development of people and how we get into these roles. And following the structure of your book, the first part is called What Product Managers Do. Define your good. So what do you say is the first thing that product managers should consider when starting a new role?
That's interesting. The chapter actually is all about, if you're a product lead, the first thing you need to do is have a compass for what you think does a product person need to look like in your situation and in your company and in your context, right? But answering your question, it's several things. So first of all, I think you can't become a product person in a vacuum. So you are in a company, in an industry, and in a certain product culture, so to say. So let's make the example of some companies really believe in this idea of empowered product teams, where the teams are actually really responsible, maybe even for the profit and loss of their product, for picking opportunities to work on what are problems that are worth solving. So that's all on the team and the product person working in the team. Where other companies, it's still more of a top-down structure where the teams are tasked with, hey, this is what we think you should be working on. Please, could you just provide us with the deadlines of when these things will be shipping, right? Totally different versions of a product role. So the first thing is figure out in which of these worlds or where on the scale you're actually living. And then find people who are living in similar worlds. And they could be colleagues of yours. If it's a large enough product organization, I'm sure you have colleagues. If it's a super small startup, then you may want to reach out. And Alexandra, you were mentioning Product Tank, right? So there might be a local meetup that you can join and see if you find other people that have similar challenges. Because what you need to create is a bit of a blueprint. So how does a product person look like in the best possible way in an environment that you're currently in? Definitely a question you could discuss with your line manager, if there is a line manager. In startups, it's often the CEO with no big product experience as well, so maybe not that helpful. And then again, find peers, find colleagues that know more about the product role than you currently do, and then figure out what type of product manager do I need to become. And once you understood that, then it's easier to find gaps and white spots in your skill matrix, and then you can really work on closing these things. And if you don't find peers, colleagues, or line manager that could help you with this, then the best thing you can do is go find trusted resources online, the people that are quoted often, the books that a lot of people have read and recommend on Amazon, and start reading those and see what of the things you are interested in and want to learn more about.
Very good advice and very actionable. I really like that. Thank you, Petra. How does one find their voice on this topic? Because I think you've also mentioned very nicely how you decided to start writing a book, also how you saw the need for this sort of focus in product management development. But what do you advise for people that are actually looking to also find their voice?
Yeah, this is really not an easy question to answer. So oftentimes people say follow your heart, which I think is a weird advice. It really depends on what you currently want to achieve, right? So if you want to find your voice for being a thought leader in a niche area or something like that, totally different approach than if you just want to, within your company, maybe be known for something and then hopefully more seen and more visible, which then ultimately leads to a promotion at some point or something like that. So my first advice would be figure out why you need to find your voice and what should it help you with, and then it's easier to talk about the approach. If it's more the I want to be more active on social media so that people do have topic tied to my name, I think then it's you need to think about what I'm really passionate about and love learning more about, because it's always a lot of learning involved when you start with content creation, because you need to do background checks of the things that you have already read and liked. Is it the only perspective? Are there more perspectives? So be prepared to learn a ton about the thing that you're interested in. And then you really have to see if there is an audience interested in that topic. I think that definitely makes sense. And then, for example, so are you playing the follower game and just want to reach a lot of followers? Or is it more like, no, I just want to create really meaningful content that maybe is only helpful for a few people, but I maybe change their careers. So then maybe you not so reliant to a lot of likes and comments and reshares, but still worth putting your ideas out. So it really depends on why you want to find your voice. And then again, something that you're passionate about, something that you want to learn more about, something where you find people that you would like to hang out with, because in all these different layers of product management topics, right, there are different kinds of people working on these things and sharing on these things. So go find your people. Would be another advice. And then just start. You could start by summarizing podcast episodes and share what your take is on these podcast episodes and what you learned from them, or these kind of things. So it's not necessarily your own content that you need to create from the beginning. It can be just highlighting other things and curating experiences for others.
Very nice advice. Thank you, Petra. You also mentioned that training is important, and we've mentioned in the beginning that you are now part of organizing Product at Heart, and you are a very active member within the product events community. But when it comes to keeping up to date, what would you say is, in your experience of training product leaders and product teams, the most important part of developing as a product professional? Is it reading, going to events, networking, testing? What is it?
That totally depends on your personal preference. I think something that is highly under-mentioned, under-leveraged, whatever, is a good community of practice. And it could be a really small community of practice with some of your colleagues and peers, or it could be a bigger global community of practice like Mind the Product, or the one that Lenny Rashitsky created. So that is something that I would advise every product person, or every person in general. Go find others that are interested in similar topics and then learn from them and with them. And you could do this by super small things like, hey, I'm interested in this book. Is somebody else interested? And should we create a small book club so that we share our takes on the book? Because it changes your way of approaching this book. You will be more dedicated to actually really read it, because 5 other people are reading it with you in parallel, and then you will discuss some of the chapters, right? So I think community is an important thing, and that's why I said like personal preference. I know a lot of us product people are introverts, so maybe don't fancy the big meetups, but still you could create this small little learning group here and there, I guess. And it does not need to include personal meetings. It could be just like a virtual book club or something like that. So that's definitely something that is not mentioned often enough, I guess. And then but it's my personal preference. For example, I tend to follow a lot of people online, and some of them provide me with valuable content, and I tend to follow them for longer. With others, it's more like, okay, they're sharing more of the things that are already out there. So that's adding to my noise ratio and not so much to the signal ratio. So I try to, get fresh perspectives from out there. And even if you can't afford the conference tickets, you still could follow all the speakers that are listed on the conference page, right? So you still can get these perspectives, even if the budget's maybe not existing, or attending the event is definitely a nice idea as well, right? Because then you could do the networking bit and the content creation and getting your knowledge update bit at the same time. But yeah, these would be some ideas that I would be having.
Very, very good. Thank you so much, Petra. Let's deep dive into the topic of culture and talent attraction, because I know those are large parts of the book and focus areas, right? How do we build a great culture?
Yeah, that is a good question. So one thing that comes to mind is really values. And I know it sounds boring, and people are sometimes kind of fed up with all these value posters that are hanging around in the offices, even if it's virtual offices these days, but you get it. But really, I think, so what is still true, even if I don't know, weather changes and the sea is rocking the boat and the shit hits the fence, right? So what is still to be true for you as a company? What are the values that you won't sacrifice, even in, for example, economical downturn? And values are creating a sense of belonging, definitely, and give orientation. So that's definitely something that I think every leader should think about. Oftentimes it's just like making the implicit things explicit, because oftentimes there is already values that everybody is buying into in a company, because there's never no values that a group of people is operating on. So sometimes it's just like figuring out what it actually is and putting it on paper, and then have these conversations about, okay, is that actually something that all of us believe into? Great values, by the way, are a good filter in hiring situations as well. So that is maybe something that you could use. So that's definitely one aspect of culture. And then, it really depends again on the company and on the industry and on all these kind of things. I think psychological safety is something that I would like to mention and that leaders should think about. So are all voices equally allowed to speak their opinion and heard in the conversations that we're having, for example, which leads us to diversity and inclusivity conversations. All that is something that you want to look into when talking about culture as well. And then it's a lot of leading by example from the manager, and the more obvious things like, how are we running meetings, and how do we think about collaboration and communication? So what is a good mail in our context? Or how are we using Slack? Is it just for chat purposes and we have mails on the side? Or are we don't use mails and do everything in Slack? But then we need something like a Sletiquette where we really describe how people can use it. So all these kind of things make up the product culture in the end.
Yeah, it's not easy to define, but I was really curious to hear your answer, because each company has their own way of going around it and about it. And
Definitely.
I feel that there's no perfect scenario, but there are companies that really thrive when it comes to culture. And it's very interesting to hear, what are you doing that is working so well? Please tell us. And then we are able to learn a little bit from the use cases, right?
Yeah, oftentimes culture needs this time for reflection as well, right? So what are we doing? How are we doing it? Are we happy with the things that we're doing? What would we like to improve on a super high level? So not talking about tools and methodologies, or how the retrospective meetings that we run are perfect. That's not what I'm talking about, but it's more like, is everybody happy with the purpose of the work that they do? Or does everybody experience gaining mastery in what they do? So coming back to Daniel Pink's autonomy and mastery and purpose, that's, for example, always a nice reflection task for product leads to think about, okay, do the people on your team experience this purpose, sense of belonging, all these kind of things? Do they experience that they get better in what they do? And do they experience the mastery that the company actually wants to provide them with? Are they allowed to make decisions, definitely in some boundaries, the boundaries of their role? But this, for example, would be something that I would advise leaders to do, to think about, and then have an impact. And so it's really making this time to look at culture from a higher level perspective. And that is not easy, because oftentimes product people and product leaders are so deep down in what do we need to ship next week. There is a trade fair coming up in September. Who has created a roadmap for that? And this one sales colleague is screaming super loud that we have to do this particular thing to keep the client happy, right? So that's basically how our days look like. And then making the time to reflect about some cultural aspects of the product teams and organizations that we run. That's not easy, but that is what I would say defines if you're kind of a really successful leader in the long run, or if you just like reacting to what life throws at you, basically.
Very good reflection, Petra. Thank you for that. When it comes to talent attraction, because you've mentioned that as a key part of culture and development of culture, what are your recommendations, and how do you think we can attract the best people for the role?
Yeah, that is not an not an easy task, because to attract the right talent, you would need to make sure that this culture is visible from the outside. And this is a super hard task, because how could you? Oftentimes people experience a culture and the values of a group of people after they join, right? So whatever you can do to make sure people understand the cultural aspects of the product organizations that you run, I think that, for example, would be a good idea. And then there's more basic things. So for example, often I read things like, yeah, and then we have a soccer table, water, and free fruits in the office. And I'm always like, yeah, okay, but everybody gets this these days. So maybe you could talk more about this mastery, autonomy, and purpose stuff, right? So what is the purpose of the work you do? So how is your company helping maybe even humankind, or maybe just like this other client just down the road here, right? Whatever it is, what's the purpose, and how could the employees experience autonomy in the roles that they have, and how could they learn over time? So for example, if your company is running a community of product practice, an eternal small company of community of product practice, then why not mentioning this in your job postings, or why not mentioning it in the conversations that you have? And why not asking candidates if they're willing to participate and to share some of their knowledge with their colleagues in these kind of roles? This is a super interesting conversation to have, because you definitely want to hire the ones that would be up for sharing, I'd say. So yeah, these kind of things is something that I would try to highlight when I would need to attract talent, despite things like a good compensation and all these kind of things. But that's the obvious stuff.
Yeah, we're not talking about the nitty gritty of the job ad, but more the important parts on belonging and what would make candidates interested in the roles. Because something I've noticed also by working in career services before, and as a product manager, and being part of community of product practice, there is a need for product managers, but there's also maybe a misunderstanding on what the role should be exactly, depending on the company.
Yeah.
And then as a candidate, it can be very confusing, because you have a set of skills, but the description of the role is not what you believe a product manager to be, because in the company you've worked for before, or different experiences you've had, you did not do the same tasks or in the same way, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage these conversations when people you coach tell you about them?
Actually, one would think it's a problem. With the coaches I had, the IC level coaches that I had, it never seemed to be a problem, because that might be my small sample size. But all of them seem to be pretty good in figuring out if the company they're interviewing for or with is meeting their criteria of how to do product management, because they know that they could easily end up in a situation in a super order-taking feature factory-like team, where what they're looking for is a fully empowered product-led organization. So usually the applicants are way more reflected on what they're looking for than the companies are. The companies are the ones that have no freaking clue what they're looking for. They have no solid role definitions. That's why my book starts with this whole part of define your good, create your compass. You need to know what you're looking for. I just told one of my clients last week that I looked through all of their job postings that they have on the website for product people, and it's so obvious that different parts of the company have different takes on product management. And that, to some extent, would be a really red flag to a lot of applicants that I have been talking to over the last 2 years, because they know, okay, if I'm interviewing with such a company and they have not yet decided what kind of product management they believe in, that can be really like shaky grounds when I join this kind of a company, right? So the applicants are really good in figuring these things out. The companies are not.
Yeah, very much agree with that. Okay, thank you so much, Petra. I think you've shared so much good advice on product management and coaching for product managers. And I would like to talk a little bit about your career development as well, because of course I find it very interesting, and we connected on this topic of role models and talking more about your career development. Personally, looking at what you do now and how you interact with so many different people, what is the best accomplishment so far in your professional life?
create job happiness, maybe. Because just I saw this cartoon the other day where some stick figure was holding a jar, and on the jar it was really like glooming, and there was a sticker on it which is called happiness, and somebody else, some other stick figure came and asked like, how did you create this? And then the first stick figure answered, I created it myself. And that to some extent is true for the job that I'm currently doing, because I really love to work with all these different companies and the products that they create, because I've exposed to so many different business models, industries, fields of operations, operating models, product cultures, all these kind of things, right? And I really love it because I'm a massively curious human being, and I learn a ton about how the world works and all these kind of things, right? So that's maybe my biggest achievement, that I decided to take the leap and go freelancing, and then created a shop myself, because back in the days, I had this conversation with one of my mentors back in the days, like, how do I call what I actually want to offer? And then he said, like, that's a product discovery coach. And I was like, yeah, that's a product discovery coach. So that's one of the first things that I did. And it was like that ever since. So whenever I decided, okay, now I need to pivot in my role to some extent, and I was always like, pooh, but how do we call this? And at some point it was like, oh, now I may be a product leadership coach. And then often now I see this job title to be more common, and hopefully companies will start to actually employ product coaches and maybe even product leadership coaches, as they do with agile coaches. But I created a lot of what I do myself, and that's maybe the biggest accomplishment, so to say, in my professional life.
That's really great. And when it comes to surprises, what surprised you what's the biggest surprise you've had so far in your career?
How much you have to fight as a woman to get the same things than the man do. That really surprised me. Before I started to be self-employed, I was always a bit like, yeah, feminism, don't know if it's a thing. But I'm so vocal about all these things, and we still things. Just this year, it happened to me that the conference organizer offered me half the compensation than a male speaker got. And when I reached out to them and say like, what's the difference between these two talks? They were like, yeah, sorry, the intern just copy and pasted to the wrong part of the table, right? So these things are still happening every day, and you have to really be cautious. So that is one of the bigger surprises, I'd say.
I'm happy you've mentioned it because I think
calling it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why we want to have this open conversations is also to not make it uncomfortable for other people that are experiencing something similar, to not feel like something is wrong.
Yeah, something is wrong, but it's not us being cautious and finger pointing at things when they're happening, right? Yeah,
exactly. Calling things out that are unfair or you believe to be unfair is not wrong. You should question it. And I'm happy you've mentioned this, because when we connected, I was also very happy that you, within your speech and in the Q&A together with other product leaders, you've mentioned the importance of representation and also having inclusivity and having a diverse team in product in general, so that we avoid as much as possible bias that comes in different shapes and forms. And I remember that this was a big topic that I really got from you, and it's important to be vocal about it, and it's also important to have allies. So I'm really happy you've mentioned how you had someone to ask, or somehow it happened that you could compare, compensations and be like, okay, I actually found out this, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely advice that I always would give. Talk about the money. If you don't talk about the money, you will not learn how oftentimes you get lower compensation than some of your colleagues do. So definitely talk about the money with whoever you can, even if your contract says you're not allowed to. That's always the case in Germany, for example, but still talk about the money. Bring that power back on your end of the table.
Thank you, Petra. That's important. That's an important point to make here, especially based on your coaching experience, for people to know that it's not easy, and it's also not a given that even if you are a popular and successful coach, things can just happen because you still have to put your foot forward and fight for what you believe is right for you.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to ask you, as a sum up here, looking back, would you do anything differently?
Many small things, but nothing big. So nothing that would of the magnitude of taking a completely different career or something like that. So I'm super happy with where I'm ended up. I'm still super happy that I first went down this road of software development because I was really massive curious about all of that works. And it still, to date, is beneficial sometimes that I have the technical background. Because some people would say like, yeah, you could have started in business and that may have made things easier. But all of these things, you can constantly pick these things up. It's never too late to learn. There's so much content out there to learn from. So yeah, no, the big decisions and the big blocks luckily have ended up to build on each other. Wouldn't change some of the bigger things. Yeah, no, pretty happy with how it turned out.
Thank you, Petra. This is great. And to sum up, I would like to go now to the final 5 fire questions and start by asking you, what is one book you think everyone should read?
Oh, there is not one. So one book that is related to the episode now maybe is Time to Think by Nancy Kline, because that is actually really nicely tying into our conversation, right? So that might be a good book recommendation.
That's great. Thank you. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness, because I was massively struggling with, taking the lead on some decisions at the beginning of my career. And at some point somebody said like, hey, Petra, you have such a great intuition in all these product decisions. So just go for it. And if somebody in the end does not like what decision you took, then just like say, sorry, next time I ask you. And it actually unblocked me in various situations in the beginning of my career.
I'm laughing because I think especially in product, there's kind of a way to do things sometimes.
Yeah. And oftentimes we like to design with the whole committee instead of just like taking the lead, and that definitely speeds things up. So yeah.
Absolutely. Who is your role model?
Oh, so many. At different stages of my life, I had different role models. It's oftentimes women. And in the beginning of my career, it was always my line manager that I really was like, how is she doing all these things? And I really like how good she is in giving feedback and all these kind of things. So yeah, it's for every stage of my career, there's other people, and it's always several people at the same time. So currently I have 4 or 5 people that I'm really closely following. Some of them because I really like their style of coaching and putting things and pointing things out and writing the right question at the right time. And for others, it's more because of their business approach and how they position themselves as thought leaders and how they do this in a really nice, deliberate, but not too noisy way and all these kind of things. So it's always different people, and that changes over time. So there's not one person that I could point to.
Okay, great. If you could change places with someone, who would it be and why?
Sometimes with a random product person, because I really miss working with product development teams sometimes. So maybe I would just like, and it needs to be a technical and complex product that they're working on. Then my inner geek would be fully happy. So that might be one thing that I would like to do every once in a while.
That's a fun exercise now from knowing what you know now, right?
Yeah.
And our last question is, what would you choose to do if you were to have another career?
Most likely something in healthcare. I think that is something that I'm always super interested in, all these medicine related topics and all the healthcare related topics. Luckily, I have a lot of clients that are operating in these industries, right? So I still have a bit of exposure to that. But that definitely could be an industry I would love to do more with or more in. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Petra.
Yeah, this was our invitation.
I hope you've enjoyed this chat. I've really been inspired by everything you've shared. I think it was very to the point and quite wise. So I'm very happy we got to spend this hour together. I hope you also had fun.
Yes, I love the questions. The topics.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Petra. And thank you all again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this interview and stay tuned for more updates from inspiring female role models.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of FemLead Podcast. Share the news with your friends and follow us on social media at FemLead Podcast everywhere.